Now let me turn initially to some priority issues in foreign and defense policy. America today has numerous foreign and defense policy challenges. A rogue Russia under Putin's leadership, waging unconventional war on Ukraine, bombing to support a genocidal regime in Syria, and threatening elsewhere. An Iran seeking to become a nuclear power and continuing its support for terrorism, destabilization of the Arab Middle East, and implacable hostility to Israel. An intransigent Israeli-Palestinian dispute. An unstable nuclear North Korea continuing to add to its nuclear arsenal. A China doubling down on assertiveness of its oceans claims against Japan in the East China Sea and its ASEAN neighbors in the South China Sea. An out-of-control series of cyber attacks against the West aimed largely at theft of both security and commercial information. A radical Islamist movement, ISIL, currently controlling large swaths of Iraq and Syria, dedicated to a new caliphate, setting aside national boundaries and seeking to inspire terrorism in North Africa, Europe, and America, and finally competing radical Islamist terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda, supporting global terror among more localized violent movements. As though this panoply of threats is not enough, American credibility and resulting ability to deter has eroded through both Republican and Democratic administrations. It is today clear that the war in Iraq was a serious miscalculation, and a subsequent administration has compounded the problem by walking away from a red line for Syria not to use chemical weapons in its civil war, and failing to develop a timely Syria strategy, not intervening in a timely manner in Iraq to prevent the virtual explosion of ISIL, failing to deter Putin in Ukraine, and concluding an arms agreement with Iran opposed by a majority of the Congress and by both our Israeli and Arab allies in the Middle East. No one believes these decisions were easy or that they were not taken in the belief that they were the right decision for the nation at the time. But whatever the rationale for these recent American actions, collectively they and other actions have eroded American prestige and credibility around the world. At the same time, budgetary constraints have harmed the readiness of the United States military, while problematic actors such as China and Russia have continued to increase their military. Other problems in meeting these challenges have included repeated failures from the Vietnam War through the war in Afghanistan and the Iraq War to the war against ISIL to follow professional military advice for any necessary warfighting. An embrace during the George W. Bush administration of a torture-light policy, which alienated America's allies and damaged the intelligence community. Reduced effectiveness of the critical National Security Council system for coordinating United States policy on an interagency basis. Absence of an effective structure to engender lasting and meaningful democratic governance in post-conflict settings such as Afghanistan and Iraq, and massive leaks in classified materials undercutting our ability to obtain crucial intelligence information and angering our allies. Let's look at a partial list of critical foreign and defense policy issues for the next president. It would include restoring the United States military and defense community to robust strength, a strength commensurate with the serious and multi-dimensional challenges facing America today. Readiness following years of conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq has significantly eroded while the threat has increased. According to the National Defense Panel commissioned by Congress to review the 2014 Quadrennial Defense Review, our military forces face, quote, major readiness shortfalls that will, absent a decisive reversal of course, create the possibility of a hollow force, end quote. Russia, a major nuclear power, must be an early and important focus. Putin must be deterred from further escalating the crises in the Ukraine, Syria, or elsewhere. ISIL is destabilizing the Arab Middle East and parts of Africa, is carrying out in areas it controls a genocide against Christians, Jews, and Muslims of different beliefs, is breeding a global terrorist threat, and is working at generating violence in America and Europe. While ISIL likely could have been more easily stopped in its formative period, the challenge today is formidable. An early priority for the new president will be to explore the potential for a global or regional coalition, effective military options, and effective political options to defeat ISIL. The conflict in Syria amounts to an ongoing genocide, is generating a massive refugee crisis, threatens a wider conflict, and serves as a base for Putin and Iranian adventurism, and an incubator for ISIL. The United States must explore the potential for a global or regional coalition to address the Syria problem. Iran is one of the largest supporters of terrorism in the world today, including its support for Hamas, Hezbollah, militias in Iraq, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria, and at least past attacks directly against the United States military in Lebanon and Iraq. Iran must cease its terrorism and its threats of aggression against Israel and neighboring countries, and the United States must leverage the recent and flawed Iran nuclear agreement to ensure that Iran never obtains a nuclear bomb. China's provocative actions in the South and East China Seas must be firmly addressed. The United States has a direct interest in protecting navigational freedom in the area and has important mutual defense treaties with Japan and the Philippines. Every effort should be made to have China understand that its own interest lies not in aggressive actions toward its neighbors, but in cooperative efforts with Japan and the ASEAN nations to peacefully resolve these island and ocean boundary disputes. Effective engagement for peace in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. America has in the past played an important role in efforts at peace in this lingering conflict. America should seek to create diplomatic openings offering promise while continuing its support to Israel against aggression and terrorism. The conflict in Afghanistan is far from over and likely will require American leadership and commitment for a considerable period. The effort must be to create an effective Afghan army and a more stable political system able to resist a resurgent Taliban and an ambitious ISIL. Similarly, the conflict in Iraq is far from over, with ISIL now controlling large swaths of the nation and Iraq politically tilting as much or more toward Iran as toward the United States. The root of the problem is a substantial loss of Sunni support for a sectarian government, strong Iranian intervention exacerbating the Sunni loss of support, and a failed army following American withdrawal. Defeating ISIL in Iraq is a core beginning in achieving political stabilization. Libya, following the overthrow of Gaddafi, is unstable and a breeding ground for ISIL and for destabilizing northern Africa. Restoring stability will be a challenge. Effective engagement with the United Nations. The United Nations has serious problems, including its blatant discrimination against Israel. But the failure of more effective American engagement has only made matters worse and empowered our enemies. We need a tougher policy of engagement with the United Nations to support American foreign policy and American values and those of our allies. In this connection, we should examine collective security generally with a view to greater before-the-fact deterrence, explore the Canadian initiative for a more effective stability force as an alternative to unilateral American action, engage more vigorously in diplomatic lobbying in capital zone UN issues, seek to end the Israel bashing which cripples the UN and any Middle East peace process, work to enhance a democracy caucus in the UN, and press for more effective UN engagement on promoting democracy and the rule of law. Effective engagement in climate change negotiations to ensure that principal polluting nations, including China and India, are carrying their fair share of the effort and that agreed solutions are cost-benefit effective. Continuing engagement in promoting freer trade through appropriate agreements which can contribute to American and global growth. Prompt Senate advice and consent to the Law of the Sea Convention. This convention expands United States resource jurisdiction in the oceans off our coast in an area roughly equivalent to the entire landmass of the nation, meets all of the security goals sought by the Joint Chiefs, and is supported by all American industry and environmental groups. United States non-adherence to date, in the face of overwhelming international acceptance of the convention, has greatly weakened the United States' ability to engage in critical issues affecting the Arctic Ocean and the South China Sea, and it has already lost for the United States 2 of the 4 deep seabed mine sites obtained in the negotiations, each of which has strategic mineral deposits of an estimated value of $250 billion. So that's a loss so far of $500 billion in aggregate value of strategic minerals for the United States through the delay. At the same time, China and Russia are moving aggressively to lock up those strategic deep seabed sites in America's absence. The scandalous non-adherence to this convention to date is a classic example as to why listening to the siren song of isolationism is a formula for decline. North Korea continues to ramp up its nuclear program and its threats against South Korea. The United States, in conjunction with the United Nations Security Council, which still guarantees South Korea against North Korean aggression, should send a clear deterrent message to the leadership of North Korea. The United States should work more actively and effectively on promoting democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Cyber attacks against America and American industry are out of control and must be deterred. America should deploy an effective anti-ballistic missile system, whether land-based or mobile sea-based, to protect against rogue nation ballistic missile threats. And the national foreign and defense policy apparatus must be strengthened and modernized. This includes ensuring more effective interagency coordination through a strengthened National Security Council system, a better funded diplomatic corps, more effective ideological engagement against totalitarian ideologies such as those of ISIL, a more effective national capacity to build stable governments in conflict zones and failed states, and where necessary, more effective warfighting by ensuring that professional military advice is effectively presented to the President as the constitutional commander-in-chief. The nation should never engage in foreign wars lightly, but once engaged, the nation must fight to win and win decisively. Are there any questions with respect to this introduction?